The goal of today's session is to provide some facts around the impact that dementia has on driving, some tools that can be used to assess changes in driving, and some ways of approaching the plans and discussion around driving and dementia. Let's start by imagining you're driving down a quiet neighborhood street after dinner when suddenly a basketball rolls out in front of your vehicle. How do you think dementia might alter your judgment and reaction time? What about the impact of the brain changes on your night vision and peripheral vision? Driving requires complex coordination between your eyes, brain, and muscles and demands quick physical responses. Because of the degenerative brain damage related to dementia, unsafe driving is inevitable. Eventually, all people with a progressive dementia will no longer be able to drive safely. Dementia impairs many functions that are needed to drive safely, including reaction time, peripheral vision, depth perception, night vision, and problem-solving abilities. Medication side effects can make things worse as well. Physical changes to the visual processing areas of the brain can affect someone's ability to process visual information. And that means it can affect a person's ability to see something that's right in front of them. An example of this might be someone might go to the fridge and not be able to see the ketchup bottle, even though it is right in front of them. What effect might this have on driving? Imagine the impact on our ability to physically see a stop sign or see a person who's about to cross the road. The facts may be difficult to hear. Older drivers with dementia are at greater risk for accidents compared to drivers without dementia. A driver with dementia is over 2.5 times more likely to be involved in a motor vehicle collision than a driver of a comparable age without a diagnosis of dementia. Half of all drivers with dementia have a serious crash within 2 years of diagnosis. Even the best of drivers will be negatively affected by a progressive dementia. It is not due to a lack of skills, but rather a result of the changes in the brain due to an illness. And so the decision to stop driving is not a matter of if, but when. So let's think about this. What are some of the challenges when it comes to giving up driving? For you, for the person you are caring for, if you are living with cognitive changes, for your care partner? What are some challenges of giving up driving? And I would encourage you to think what comes to mind for you. Some people have shared with us that they need to drive because there is no one else to take them to appointments and for groceries. Driving represents freedom, independence, and mobility. Others have also shared that they have been driving for more than 60 years, and being a driver is central to how they see themselves. Does that ring any bells for you? There is little doubt that dementia is a journey of losses, and driving can be one of the most difficult losses to cope with. Driving can be a huge part of a person's identity, and having to give this up can be devastating. Many report the loss of driving as being worse than death, which underscores the vital and integral nature of this part of ourselves. Driving or retiring from driving means we need to plan alternative ways of getting around, which can be difficult for some people to get used to, as they may now have to fit into other people's schedules. This is particularly challenging if the person with dementia is the only driver in the household or the primary driver. Both caregiver and person living with dementia may find yourself struggling with this decision. Driving cessation also means significant changes in lifestyle and an increased dependence on others. For the person living with dementia, this may be a painful reminder that the disease is progressing. But there are actually some positives about not driving. Some positives that people have shared with us are that family and friends stop worrying, or they worry, or at least worry less. Also, not driving usually means saving money. It is expensive to keep a car, gas, insurance, and maintenance for a car are all costly, and that money saved can be used for taxis. Are there any others that you can think of that might be positive about not driving? What about seeing more of the world as a passenger? Not driving also encourages people to get out and go for more walks. You might find that you find new locals, new coffee shops in your own neighborhood that you haven't discovered before. It may be hard for us to acknowledge positives of driving retirement. If nothing else, the reduction of worry can be huge for both person living with dementia and the care partner. Less worry and stress about having to remember how to drive to destinations and the rules of the road. I'm going to share a quote with you. This quote is from Dave Barry, who's a comedian, and he says, "The one thing that unites all human beings, regardless of age, gender, religion, economic status, or ethnic background, is that deep inside, we all believe that we are above average drivers." While this quote is obviously not completely true, most of us want to believe that our driving abilities are better than they may be. This does not always make it true, though. For a person living with dementia, this may mean that we need to be creative in our approach to the retirement from driving. One of the difficulties with driving sensation is that there may be damage to the part of the brain that allows us to be aware of our actions and the impact of our own actions. As a frequent result, the person living with dementia may not realize that their driving has deteriorated. This puts increased pressure on caregivers to monitor their driving and ensure that a plan for retiring from driving is in place. Receiving a diagnosis of dementia does not mean that you will automatically lose your driver's license. However, there may come a time when driving is no longer safe. And so we strongly recommend that you have the discussion early on about stopping driving. As we have just discussed, this is a very emotional topic, and so it is important to be sensitive to the loss the driver is experiencing. Try to come up with a plan together for driving retirement and try to agree on a plan or a strategy for driving sensation in advance. A plan alleviates the stress of the decision making later on, even if someone is unable to recall the plan. You may want to frame the conversation as a person retiring from driving. Also, to find out what alternative transportation is available in your community. Public transit, rides provided by community organizations or volunteers, lifts from family members and friends, as well as taxi savers. They can agree upon a checklist of changes that will be an indication that it's time to stop. Together, review the common warning signs listed in the driving handout. Consider using the Bcaa driving warning signs checklist. In fact, this is a useful checklist for all of us to use. Obviously, any of them can happen to any of us, but an accumulation of these experiences indicate that it is time to discuss stopping driving. This checklist includes things like stops in traffic for no reason, has difficulty judging distance, gets lost while driving, sometimes misses traffic signs, has close calls or near misses, hits the curb, scrapes or dents the car, fails to stop for red lights or stop signs, sometimes confuses the brake and gas pedals, drives slower than average speed. Cars seem to appear from nowhere, or other drivers are honking at the driver. Keep in mind that if you're a person living with dementia, you probably experience some short-term memory loss. So it's possible that you may forget giving up your license or discussing alternative travel arrangements. Work with someone you trust to come up with a plan to help you remember. Do you want a reminder note on the fridge or a note that could be right on the car window? What will help you remember the decision you make around driving and safety? Also consider that also consider that things are cues for driving. Put the car keys out of sight in a safe place. Lock the steering wheel with a club. Sometimes it's better to park the car out of sight. It's tough to see that car every day and reminded that you can't drive. When it comes to having conversations about retiring from driving, there are things that may help to make it a wee bit easier. Recognize and acknowledge the feelings of loss for both you, the person living with dementia, and caregiver, especially if you rely heavily on your vehicle. Focus on safety. As a care partner, try to be honest about your concerns for driver safety. If you are a person living with dementia, know that dementia can make it difficult for you to recognize changes in your ability to drive. It is also possible that you could forget the time you scraped your car or hit a curb. Dementia may interfere with your ability to evaluate your driving skills. So having someone you trust help you assess your driving could be very useful. Use questions in conversation to try to guide the person to their own conclusion about driving. One question that often helps families decide if it is time to have the conversation is to ask yourself if you would be comfortable having the driver driving on their own with their grandchildren in the car. You may think that the driver always has a support person with them, but again, consider if the driver were operating the vehicle alone with grandchildren in the car. For many, this emphasizes concerns of safety and can bring light to the gravity of your concerns. It is always better if the driver voluntarily gives up their license. This protects their dignity and can make them feel more comfortable about their decision, though the changes in the brain due to dementia may mean that they need to have this conversation several times, and that the person living with the cognitive changes is very likely to forget both the discussion and the fact that they are no longer have a license. Sometimes the conversation around driving retirement is just too difficult for a family member or friend. The topic is sensitive and it can also be very emotional. Care partners and people living with dementia may refer or consult with a physician or another family member whom they trust. Some doctors will prescribe driving retirement on a prescription pad, which can help with remembering. It's important how you have this conversation and with whom. Discuss how alternatives to driving can help to maintain independence and consider exploring driving alternatives together as a new activity. For example, taking the bus route together. I'm going to share a short video with you that may help with the conversation. In the video created by the Alzheimer Association, Frank has early stage Alzheimer's, and the doctor has said it's no longer safe for him to drive. His wife doesn't drive but knows it's time to discuss finding alternative transportation.
Frank was diagnosed last year with Alzheimer's. His doctor has insisted that he stop driving immediately due to his diminished and deteriorating cognitive judgment. Frank's wife, Betty, agrees with the doctor. However, Betty has never driven and is an unlikely candidate for learning. She has relied on Frank for all of their transportation needs, but she knows she must confront him.
I think I'll head on over to Jim's before it gets too late.
Oh, honey, wait a moment, please. This is from Dr. Robinson. Do you remember from yesterday?
No, I do not.
Would you read it, please?
There's nothing wrong with my driving.
You almost hit a man yesterday. He was on his bicycle, don't you remember?
There's no such thing as a prescription to stop driving.
This is from Dr. Robinson, just to remind you, when we met with him yesterday. We met yesterday morning. Honey.
I know, Okay. I sometimes forget where you get your hair done. on Fridays, where you get it done on Fridays, but that has nothing to do with my driving.
You always told me to be honest with you. When this thing first started, you said no matter how difficult, I needed to be direct. You almost hit a man yesterday. He was riding on his bicycle. Do you know we could never live with ourselves if we hurt someone?
We?
This is us. We're a team. This is us, we. Frank, you've been driving for almost 60 years, and you're a great driver. But things change. We're older now.
You could drive us.
Not with my eyes. I couldn't get a license.
The cinnamon rolls. The coffee and the cinnamon rolls at the mall. Who's going to drive us there in the morning? That's our group.
Frank, I've been thinking about this. Ted and Joan always say they want to help.
He's a terrible driver.
Or we could start a carpool and we'd buy the cinnamon rolls and the coffee. Huh? Just the coffee. Oh, what does it matter? What difference is it, Frank?
What about your hair? They're not going to take you to the salon, too.
It's so close. I could get a taxi. Remember when we first made a decision to downsize to this place? One of the reasons we moved here was because it was so close to everything. That was part of the plan. Honey, please.
What kind of a man am I if I can't even drive you to get your hair done or to the mall? No. That's not a life. That's nothing.
Frank.
It's nothing.
A real man understands change and tries to act in a responsible way. You're a real man, Frank. I don't need a chauffeur. I didn't marry a chauffeur. I don't need you to drive me, to drive us. Nothing matters, Frank. Except you. Nothing. You're all that matters to me. I love you, Frank.
Speaking to a spouse with Alzheimer's about stopping driving can be very challenging, especially if he or she has been the main driver in the family. Here are some ideas for how to frame the conversation. Reinforce medical diagnoses and directives. Frank trusts and respects his longtime doctor and may be more likely to accept his recommendation. Anticipating that Frank would not remember his doctor's instructions, Betty had the physician write on a prescription pad that Frank was to no longer drive. She shows him the prescription when he becomes defensive. Demonstrate understanding and empathy. Acknowledge the difficulty that relinquishing driving poses. Betty states that she knows Frank has been a good driver for more than 60 years, but she then explains that he no longer possesses the necessary judgment to drive safely. Stress the positive while offering alternatives. Driving is an empowering activity, especially for seniors. Finding an alternate driving source can help alleviate feelings of helplessness. Betty tells Frank that they can reach out to their friends to carpool to the mall each morning, and that she can take a taxi to her Friday hair appointments. Offer unconditional love and support. Agreeing to stop driving can be humiliating, leading to feelings of worthlessness. Reassure the person of your unconditional support and love, dismissing any significance attached to driving. Betty tells Frank that he was never her chauffeur and that she loves him. This may be the first of many conversations about driving. Due to the person's dementia, it is likely that you will have to address the driving issue several times. The person may forget that they agreed to stop driving, or they may not believe they cannot drive safely anymore, in spite of evidence to the contrary. It is important to remain patient, but firm about the decision.
We all want to act responsibly as citizens in our communities to ensure that our roads are safe for ourselves, our families, other drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians. Conversations about changing driving skills are difficult yet important to have. So, what tools are available to help ensure safety for you and everyone around you?
Hi there, welcome back everybody. I'm just going to start the slides and Cara's going to speak to those. Okay.
Okay, super. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, and so for all of us, and for those of you, I should say, driving is such a challenging topic, and also for the person with dementia, but family members as well, and supporting their family member with that transition and that change. Really important to start that conversation early. So talk to the person with dementia. And also, you know, as we've seen in the video with Frank, his partner had said, you know, Frank, you've had a really great driving record, but things are changing now, and dementia can affect your reaction time and judgment and reasoning. And so then you start having that conversation around what are some of the alternative transportation modems that are there, you know, so looking at maybe it's access a bus or metro transit or taxis. And I think if we can actually flip back one more there, thanks Claire, looking at alternative options sooner rather than later. And then of course, being aware of those changes. And so because dementia is a progressive disease and it affects a person's ability to reason and to make decisions quickly, it's to be aware of those. And sometimes we can actually add to the problem by co-piloting, by sitting in with our family members with dementia and thinking that we might be able to instruct them so that they can continue to drive. But that actually is not helpful because those same changes are occurring in the person's brain. So really important to stop driving immediately. And we have more information actually at the Alzheimer Society that I'll talk to in a few minutes, but really important to know too that if you're struggling, if you're having a difficult time and having that conversation about driving and dementia, talk to your partners or your family member who has dementia, who has the diagnosis, or maybe they don't have a diagnosis yet. Really important though to talk to the physician or healthcare professional. And alternatively as well, you know, after speaking to a healthcare professional, give us a call at the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia and we can help through those difficult conversations and giving you some suggestions. So we'll flip to the next slide, Claire. So some additional resources, which we found quite helpful. The Alzheimer Society of Canada has the resource in front of you there, Conversations About Dementia and Driving. This is really a little booklet. I actually have a copy of it here. And we can send out these resources to you. So Dementia and Driving there. And the link is provided there as well. Now, Drivable, for people who are looking at wanting to get a driver's test, Drivable offers these tests. There is a cost associated with the test. It's a simulated driving test. So it doesn't measure overall cognitive functioning or intelligence. Important to note that. And again, the other resource that we have up on the screen is the driver evaluation program, which is offered through the rehab center at the QE2. And you do require a doctor's referral for that, for individuals who require a driver's test. So this can be done in clinic. Actually, the two-part test is done in clinic for this evaluation, and they do as a second part of that a on-road evaluation for that. And then, of course, if you're looking for more information, we have the website up there for the Department of Motor Vehicles as well. So let's click to the next slide and then follow up with our questions and answers. And before we actually get into the question and answer section, I'm going to share with you the fact that we're actually, the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia is contributing to a trial about dementia and driving. So for individuals who are interested in participating in a research study around driving and dementia, we ask that you give us a call to learn more. So call the 1-800 number up in front of you there, 1-800-611-6345. And I believe we have some questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Cara. And the first question that we have, and if anybody wants to, there's still time to type your questions in the chat and press enter. So, but the first question that's come in is who can assess for driving?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. we get that question actually quite often on the info line. So if your family needs to be assessed to determine whether or not they should be driving, really important for them to connect with the family physician. So they may assess a person's ability to drive. In some instances, they may have a specific type of dementia which may qualify them to stop driving immediately. So the family doctor, what they do is they would write a letter and then they would send it to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Okay, so the Department of Motor Vehicles can then do a driving assessment based on a paper test. And then there are the other tests that are available as well through Drivable, which is the cognitive assessment of driving ability. And that's used through simulated driving program that they have. There is a cost involved with that. And then, of course, there is the program, which is through the QE2, the Rehab Center, which is the driver evaluation program. Okay. The other thing, too, that's important to note is that the family physician actually gives an opinion about driving. So the family physician can't take your driver's license away, but they do send a letter to the Department of Motor Vehicles to say, in their opinion, they think Mr. Smith has a medical condition, which makes it difficult for him to drive safely. Okay. So that's one thing if you're wondering about that assessment process.
And there's different rules for different provinces, am I right, Cara?
Yes.
So if you are watching in the future, these
Definitely.
are for Nova Scotia.
Yeah, and so in most provinces, physicians are legally required to report a person who has a condition that makes them unsafe to drive. However, in the province of Nova Scotia, physicians are not bound by, legally, but ethically they would be. So really important if you have concerns about driving to have that conversation with the family doctor.
Okay, and we have another question. So who will take the license if need be, or what to do if the doctor doesn't take it?
And again, so if it's not the family physician that writes the letter as a suggestion, then it's really important for the family member to contact the Department of Motor Vehicle. The thing is that's a tough situation, right? It puts you in an awkward position because you respect your family member and you want to meet them where they are and you want them to maintain their independence, but you want them to maintain their independence safely. So you can report a person who you think is unsafe to drive. Note when you do send that report in, though, that it isn't necessarily going to be anonymous.
Okay, good to know. So another question is, if one family member has told the doctor that he or she has given up driving and then consequently takes the car out, what can one do, especially if the family member is not the primary caregiver or the partner?
Right, so the person is out on the road, like, is that the question?
Sounds like the
So they're actively out on the road driving the car is what it sounds like.
Yes.
It might be a good idea, actually, if they're clearly unsafe to drive. I would suspect, and there's been, you know, mishaps in the past, maybe there's been collisions, dents on the car, that sort of thing. It's probably a good practice to contact, I don't think it would be the Department of Motor Vehicle. I think you might want to call, not 911 as an emergency, but just to say, you know, let's just say my dad is driving the car. He doesn't have his license. He has a diagnosis of dementia. Important for them to know that, just to make sure that the individual gets off the road safely. But again, it's tough, right? Because you want to ensure that it's a qualified person who can ensure dad gets off of the road without alarming him. I'm just thinking, you know, if it's an RCMP, just to make sure that the whistles aren't necessarily going on, it's going to be really difficult. So really, really key, if your family member has lost or hung up the keys or their driver's license is revoked, to ensure that the car maybe is not there in the yard anymore, so that it's not a trigger, or that maybe the keys are changed. So you have a different set of keys there, or disabling the car may be another thing to do. Maybe take the battery out of the car, or possibly gifting the car to another family member, so that that's not an option, so that the person doesn't get into the car and get on the 102 or the 101, which might be really difficult, right, to get them back home safely again.
Okay. And yeah, it's kind of, and if that person needs or has different information to add, they can call the info line and get some direction there too, and help troubleshoot that situation. It can be quite complex. So the next question is, how long is the drivable test valid for? My person had one a few years back, but I'm wondering if it has to be renewed.
I would reach out to, depending upon where they got the test done, I would contact the organization that they would have had that test done with. We wouldn't have that information here. Not sure, Claire, if you know the answer to that. My answer to that would be to contact either the DMV or the driver evaluation program at the QE2.
Yes, I think whoever provided that license should be able to say how long it is valid, if a retest is needed. Okay, so we have a question here about how the Alzheimer Society feels read the Department of Motor Vehicles evaluating for driving compared to the other options, which are much more expensive. The consensus may be that the hospital, that the test is not sensitive to cognitive changes and therefore not as highly recommended as the other more expensive ones. Now, I know the Alzheimer Society wouldn't necessarily have an opinion on which one was most appropriate. What are your thoughts on that, Cara?
Yeah, and I think the thing to take into consideration is that, you know, the Department of Motor Vehicles would be a road test. And so it's not necessary, it's not taking into consideration the cognitive ability of the person. So really, you know, if you're looking at testing a person with a medical condition, you would want to have a thorough assessment. So having an in-clinic assessment, which looks at a person's cognition, and also the on-road test as well. Because, you know, it's your family member's safety that's at risk, but also other individuals who may be on the road as well. So I think the tests are quite different. And one would be more thorough. Obviously, that would be the test that would be through the driver evaluation program, through the rehab center, or something similar, such as Drivable, which I believe are available in some of the physiotherapy clinics in Dartmouth and Halifax here.
Yes, and I did read also that some people's health insurance coverage may contribute to the cost. So
Right. Yep.
again, we can't, that's just an individual basis, but yes, very different options, and as well, depending on the stage of dementia too, early diagnosis, it might be, you might be looking for something, you know, a different option. So there's just the options that we found in looking at this topic. So okay, so another question we have is, what do I do if my husband keeps asking for his car keys? His license was taken away months ago, but he asks for his car keys almost daily and gets upset when I tell him he can no longer drive.
Yeah, and that comes up. So if he's just asking for the car keys, as we had discussed earlier, you know, it's always good to have a different set of keys. So not the keys that will actually operate his vehicle, because it's dangerous if his driver's license is revoked. So again, you know, it's disabling maybe part of the car so that it's not usable, or regifting the car to another family member. Sometimes the car itself, if it's parked in the driveway, I know I've had some families who've actually parked their car in their neighbor's driveway so that they couldn't see it, because just looking at it can sometimes be a trigger. So again, it's, maybe he's just looking for the keys. If he's just looking for the keys, then give him any set of keys, but not the set of keys for the car, because the concern would be for him to get into the car and operate it. Ideally, you know, and everybody is very different. Some people will have insight, you know, and they'll understand that, oh my goodness, you know, my judgment isn't quite the way it is, or I feel uneasy in getting in my car. So just by virtue of that fact, they decide to hang up the keys. However, not so in other individuals. They may never recognize. And so at some point, they may overestimate their abilities and still think, because they had a good driver's record in the past, they may not remember that they have a diagnosis of dementia, and that has impaired their ability to react accordingly if that basketball sort of came out, or if somebody walked out in the crosswalk quite quickly. So again, it's making sure that your family member is safe, other people are safe, and you know, really having that conversation early. It's not going to be as compassionate as you can. It's not going to be an easy conversation. And again, like I said, if you're really struggling with that, give us a call through our info line so that we can walk through that with you to navigate that conversation, because it is going to be difficult. And I think one of the suggestions in the video was to find somebody. Usually there's that person in the family that has a really good rapport with the individual. So choose that individual who's compassionate, who's understanding, to maybe start that conversation first with your family member.
I think as well, Cara, you know, there are the other options when people do want to go out and drive, and maybe say, you know, especially in the winter, the weather isn't good today, this isn't the best day to go out driving. Just kind of deferring that decision, you know, just deferring the conversation. And or I've heard people say, you know, the car's in the garage being fixed. And so and again, it depends what stage of the journey that people are on into what's appropriate. But sometimes if it is the same question, those can be just helpful responses in the moment. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so the final question we have is, what can I do if my partner insists on driving when it's no longer safe?
Right. So one of the things you can do if they insist on driving, if it's no longer safe, and again, this is difficult. but you may have to call the Department of Motor Vehicles and let them know that you have a family member who is, you know, resisting getting out on the road or wanting to continue to drive. So they may send a letter, you know, again, noting that when you report somebody, it's not anonymous. So if they send a letter for them to come in to do a driver's test, it's a possibility. And again, it's sort of very similar to the other questions that we just sort of answered, in that, you know, if they're not aware, it's not having that insight that they're having difficulty. It's really ensuring that they're safe. So having the driver's license suspended, even having a driver's license suspended may not necessarily stop the person. So again, it's removing the vehicle, you know, switching up the keys, regifting the car, using distraction or sort of like a redirection, or coming up with some alternative sources of transportation, whether that's, you know, we've seen Frank and his wife in the video, and they decided, okay, so we can't drive anymore. She wasn't able to drive either. So they partnered with their friends, or they called a, you know, a family member. But again, it's planning early, trying to figure out what else is available. It could be Metro Transit, it could be Accessibus. Uber is now available in some areas in the province. So some other alternatives to think about.
Okay, thanks so much, Cara. I just saw a question in the chat about the email resources, so I did respond, and we will email everybody that has registered for today with the links to the resources that we had, and we usually upload a copy of the recording to our YouTube as well, so you can go back and look at those again. So I'll just hand back to Cara and see if I can find the button for the poll. Thanks.
Sure.
Over to you, Cara.
Excellent. Okay, and I think there's one other question there. How will I know when my partner should stop driving? And so some of the signs that you may have noticed with your family member is they may be slower to respond. So the response time coming up to maybe a red light or an intersection, it may be a bit slower to respond. If they've had some traffic violations in the recent past, any collisions, but maybe also taking too much time to get to their destination, or perhaps not reaching their destination at all. So maybe they're driving on the 103 and they wanted to get to Tantallon and they've bypassed the exit. So those are some of the things that can happen. Maybe they're driving too slow or too fast. Maybe they're stopping at green lights. So these are some of the other things to be aware of when notifications to you thinking that, oh, maybe we should stop driving. And I know some family physicians, when they're asked that question, they will often say, family physicians or geriatricians, do you feel comfortable with your grandchildren driving in the car with Bob? If he's driving, and if they automatically think, oh, goodness gracious, no, I don't think I'd want my grandchild in the car with Bob driving, then that's a good indicator to know that alternative transportation is probably a must at that moment in time. Again, I want to remind you, before we finish up today, we want to thank you for coming in and sitting in on the Driving in Dementia video and conversation afterward. As Claire had said, this will be posted up on our YouTube page, the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia